Listen to this. There is no precept of God which has been more violated than changing God's worship to suit our taste. We Reformed should look to see how short we come of upholding Christ's worship and consider how we shall answer for it in the day of judgment for its abuse. There is a great misery in our time. Preaching is done, the sacraments are kept, the ministry is exercised, but whether these are kept without spot or rebuke, you judge. For a pastor to suffer the worship of God to be dispensed profanely in a profane manner or an unlawful form, contrary to the pattern which the apostle has set down in 1 Timothy 6, 13-17, is miserable profaneness. We should suffer nothing to be added or taken away from the blessed ordinances of the worship of God. For every addition of man is a fleshly spot. It pollutes and defiles the things that are holy. The preacher who wrote this died in 1634. And this was published the following year. But it was written a good time, even before he died. You'd think he's talking about today in your Reformed church. His name was John Forbes. Again, nothing has ever been published by John Forbes. He was a Scottish minister, a fiery, as you can tell, a fiery Reformed preacher who desired to see the church reformed for the glory of God. And this work by Forbes is the first work ever published since the time he lived and preached. It's called The Christian's Charge Never to Offend God in Worship. People offend God weekly in worship. Do you do that? Parades and puppet shows. Entertainment is what most look for. Could this be more relevant for you and I in the church today? And Forbes is not talking about the charismania of the church. No. He's talking to Reformed churches that claim to adhere to Reformed worship. Very simple. If you adhere to Reformed worship, you just follow the directory of public worship that Westminster put down. Otherwise, it's in some way deviant. And that's what Forbes is talking about. Forbes will show you that the house of God should be ordered by God's rules. And in this, it should be seen as wholly appropriate that God's people are to be ordered by God's rules. Does that not make sense? Such worship should show reverence, piety, love, desire, and joy in God. And it should be structured and ordered according to God's holy principles. Worship for the Christian should be an expression of God's heart back to God, filtered through the congregation to Him. We ought to reflect back to God how wonderful and most blessed He is in pure and undefiled worship. Forbes demonstrates this from 1 Timothy 6, 13-16. Go read that. It's impossible to worship God by human invention. It's equally impossible to worship God by human ingenuity. And it is impossible to worship God in an atmosphere that has not been structured and ordered by God and His Word. We call this the regulative principle. And that expressly, clearly determines the way sinners are to approach God, because God alone is the one who determines that. Such a doctrine, such a concept should not be placed by the wayside because we and our contemporary church culture are more fascinated and captivated by being entertained than by God's truth. Just consider how many hours a year you spend watching television and movies in comparison to reading good books like this one. This work is available right now at Puritan Publications. Go to www.puritanpublications.com to get this book in ebook form or print form. There's a link on the ebook form that will give you the print version. I would implore you to get a copy of this work and evaluate your church, your worship against Forbes and his sound exegetical directives, both for Christians and pastors. Because Forbes says, listen, if the pastor is wayward or deviant in his understanding of what Reformed worship is, what biblical worship is, the flock then is going to be deviant in their understanding of worship. So, may the Lord bless you abundantly as you study along with John Forbes on this most important topic of the regulative principle of worship.